Hello my friends, my peeps, and welcome to Carpo's Corner. I guess I use that intro when I'm making a video that's along the lines of speculation or something that's more of my own philosophy, but there will be definitely some truth to this, and I'm sure a lot of people will understand where I'm coming from, and others will just be curious to know what the hell I'm talking about when I speak of entities and DMT itself, which is dimethyltryptamine, and this isn't the main focus of the video. The main focus is really, I guess, the universal consciousness, panpsychism, and I consider myself, and dreams, of course. Now I consider myself an expert on all these things. Why? Well, because I live, and I'm a human. I'm almost 44 years old. I've been basically, in my mind, I guess, a philosopher for at least 30 years, just thinking about stuff constantly. I mean, I'm a thinker. Some people are, some people aren't, and that's fine. But in that time, I've had a lot of time to process things. I've become obsessed with dreams years back. Lately, I've been having some really strange dreams, which kind of inspired me to make this video. And I believe that dreams are somewhat of a gateway to our subconscious to understand our needs, our fears, our desires. And I'm not going to get into the Freudian concepts of, every dream's about sex and your mother determines, your personality. We are all definitely affected by our environment and our desires, but there's a lot more to it when it comes to dream translation. And I get annoyed when I see these dream translation pages where you can go to online, and you can go there and they'll interpret your dreams for you. You just look it up on a list. It doesn't work that way. It's much more complicated. But anyhow, I could go on and on about this forever. I should get to the main point. I wanted to talk a little bit first. First, I should make the disclaimer. This video is not intended to be is not intended to inspire anyone to use any illegal substances. I know that YouTube has major issues with discussing these topics, and it's kind of hit and miss as to what's allowed. But I don't believe this to be harmful content or dangerous content. Really, I'm just discussing the findings and the claims that have been made by people under the influence of these substances. Namely DMT, which is what I was thinking about this morning, because DMT, or dimethyltryptamine, is produced naturally by our own brains, and at this point it's believed that it's produced by the pineal gland, which also produces melatonin, which helps us sleep. Now, DMT is released in small quantities, apparently upon birth, from mothers giving birth and the baby itself, as well as upon death. A large amount is released into the bloodstream. And one of the theories is, at least, that when you see this tunnel when you die, or when you go see the light and go to the other side, it's DMT. Now, I'm not saying this is true or not true. I think it's irrelevant. I read an entire book called DMT, the Spirit Molecule, years ago, by a doctor who actually performed some of the most well-known dimethyltryptamine tests under controlled, studies, and just as fascinating to learn more about it. The question here, and what I'm getting at, is what is the point of people using psychedelics, and why is it so stigmatized? Why is it considered to be such a... And this is changing, of course, but there's a strong fear of psychedelics, and I wanted to start by talking about panpsychism. Now, I was trying to think of a way. I'm actually preparing to do a audio recording, talking like a video about enlightenment, and it's kind of a joke that excuse me, that it's going to be done in kind of a joking format. The whole idea is that enlightenment is the discovery that you already had what you have, and one of the greatest realizations I've had in my life, if you will, is that the universe is conscious. Not that the universe has a God that's sitting on the throne or in the clouds aware of you and what you're doing, or cares about what you're doing specifically, but rather everything cares about what everything is doing, because everything is conscious. Now, Plato believed in this. There are various philosophers through history have believed in some form of panpsychism, and a lot of people just roll their eyes to it. They say, well, and panpsychism just means you believe nature has a psyche. It's pan, which is nature, and psychism, which is having to do with the psyche. So nature is conscious, and a lot of people say, yeah, right, rocks have brains, or rocks are conscious. That's nonsense. That's not necessarily what it means. It's just kind of a blanket term for believing the universe is aware. Plato believed in it, and he called it the world soul, or the anima mundi, or anima mundi. You may have heard that before. And a lot of different folks through history have argued about whether or not the universe is aware of itself. And to me, one of the most interesting, I guess, the fascinating part about this is that the people who argue against it argue so strongly from ignorance, and the people who argue for it, it's easy to say they argue from ignorance too, but many people have experienced this. And the thing is, what we believe experience is not equal to knowledge, that experience can be biased, and it can. Our brains trick us all the time in the colors we see, the patterns we see, how we interpret the world. We are all so unique that no two minds are alike or perceive the world the same way. And not only that, but when folks say that there's no such thing as an objective reality, well, they're not too far off, just because of the fact that we're observing light bouncing off of these atoms, and the way we perceive it is different than, say, a snake or a bee. And it's just our place in the universe to see things the way we see it. And what I'm getting at is that we don't see things the same way. So when you take psychedelics, the experience you have, a lot of people demean it, or just say, well, it's just escaping reality. And that's kind of what I'm getting at, is what exactly is reality, and how do you define this reality? And since we're all so unique, different realities might cross paths. When in these states, you might think more like somebody who is already a schizophrenic, for example. Doctors in the 60s were taking psychedelics to try to understand what it was like to be in the mind of a schizophrenic. And look, I don't take substances lightly, okay? LSD, psilocybin, DMT, I take them very seriously. So I'm not saying go out and take psychedelics and see the other side. I've dealt firsthand with psychedelic-induced psychosis, at least with 2 different people. Perhaps more, but it's hard to know where our minds really are sometimes, and whether the person was already that way. But that's for another time. Like I said, the anima mundi, or the world mind. Okay, so in Stoicism, they had something similar. That the world was divine and aware on its own, and that was called the pneuma, the essence of the world, or the essence of the mind. Pneuma. And the pneuma, of course, was controlled by the logos. And if you don't know the logos, it's in ancient philosophy, the logos is the word. And in religious terms, it would be translated as the word of God, the word that brought everything into existence. So the logos brings things into existence, and the pneuma is the essence of it, or the mind. And it gets even stranger. All of this is, of course, just hogwash to a lot of people, and I really could care less, because this is coming from my own, thoughts on the subject. So, over time, people needed a simpler language. Philosophers were just these, annoying old men who wanted everybody to think complicated about the world, and so we brought in things like Greek. Not just poetry and comedy, we brought in the tragedy, plays, and seeing, this is why we still watch movies, to understand these recurring themes and stories. But we also brought in these gods, or the Greek gods, which all represented different facets of the world, or as we saw the world. And we needed better symbols, and so the symbols became more refined over time. We used to have a lot of symbols and a lot of gods, and we refined it down to a cross and one God, one Son. It became very simple for a lot of people. The Holy Trinity makes things very convenient, and I'm not here to even talk about religion, so I won't go any further on that, but the religion was based on the forms, the ancient forms of many of these pre-existing ideals and about how the universe worked, I guess. So, this led to monism, which was belief in the one, right? And the universe is one, of course, and this deals with all things. So it became, if you think about it, it's not a matter of dismissing monotheism. It's a matter of realizing that the one really encompasses all these many separate facets. So the one God represented all the gods. And I'm not saying any gods exist at all. What I'm saying is that believing the universe is conscious doesn't really have to fall in line with being religious, and it tends to be thrown aside. And I'm going to get to this whole psychedelic aspect because this is really one and the same as psychedelics, if you know where I'm coming from. I think it was Rupert Sheldrake who coined the term morphogenic field, if I'm not mistaken. And Sheldrake did a lot of studies on these types of things. He has some outlandish theories and some weird ideas that haven't been proven, and he tends to stand by things that maybe aren't true. But you know what? That's how things change, and I'm not saying that he's right or wrong. Fascinating ideas. Basically, the idea of the morphogenic field is that there's a field all-encompassing. And this field is what some people would call Akasha, or the Akashic records. It's really, these are just metaphors for something larger. A simple field of information, if you will. You could think of it, you can compare it to computers and the internet. It's easy to do these analysis and compare it to the way the internet operates and how the cloud operates. Think of it as the cloud, but the universally accessible cloud that anyone can tap into if they have the right frequency or tuning into the radio. And a lot of people believe that this is what consciousness is. Now, I can't say whether it is or not. There's a theory, follow me here, this is outlandish, but it makes a lot of sense, that dark matter, or this invisible force and energy we can't see in the universe, which makes up 85% of the universe, I believe, and I think dark matter makes, 80%, and dark energy, like 10 more percent. Basically, it's over 90% is this invisible energy. What if that's a proto-consciousness? And the idea was that when the universe formed, this invisible energy is really this, what you would call a proto-consciousness, or a primal version of consciousness, which keeps things in order. Now, when you think about it, it just sounds absurd, and the mind wanders away from it. It's like, whatever, it doesn't make sense. We want simple answers. That's a pretty simple fucking answer, if you ask me. Pardon my language. But the proto-consciousness is the field from which we all draw our consciousness, but we have our individual selves too, our egos, our souls or spirits, whichever you want to call it, which inhabit a body which also has this primal circuit which has been directed by ancient evolution through history, maybe way beyond the existence of our planet even, because life is life. And the idea is that all the energy and all the information goes back into this field. I think it's fascinating. I don't know. Let me put it this way. They'll get in, a lot of these guys get into microtubules and how they may receive signals. I don't know enough about neuroscience and quantum, mechanics to understand whether these are possible or whether it's true, and I really don't care. I'd rather go there than read about it. And that's what psychedelics are all about. And if you think of the brain as a receiver and a processor, all right, follow me for a minute here. The question I have for, one of my biggest question, I guess, when it comes to existence, because I don't expect to understand the universe and everything within it. I don't want to. And I don't think it's possible as a human. But I would ask this: why does emergence exist, and why do things become more complex? Why do we evolve? Because if you think about it, we've evolved a consciousness, and we've evolved to the point where we are right now. We are fragile, extremely fragile. One major meteor attacked by several different, meteors, or one good nuclear winter, we could actually be driven extinct. And it's happened many times through history. If nature is intelligent, the question would be, why does it keep evolving large creatures? And it makes me wonder. I don't know. what I'm saying is we don't, as individuals, have to evolve to this point in order to have consciousness in the universe. The universe did not have to make people to be aware. Bacteria could be very aware. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again. We might be bacteria factories for basically vehicles for transporting viruses and bacteria to other planets. Perhaps nature evolved us in order to do this work to create these vehicles to transport to other stars. It doesn't seem like it really makes sense anyway, because we find out that fungal spores can exist in space for who knows how long, perhaps billions of years. There is so much we don't know, and so much about our own Earth history we don't know. And we hear about it on the media, what may have happened, how the pyramids were built. We watch these documentaries and we try to understand our history. And then all of a sudden, we take a psychedelic and we are blown into another land. We cannot believe the things that we're incorporating into our new reality. Holy shit, I understand this, I understand this, I understand this. And I'm not saying that you get a full download, because, and I'll get to that in a minute, but the information that we receive on psychedelics is not something that we are gaining from this ether or downloading. Perhaps, in a sense, it's already there. We're just opening the channel between our own brain to communicate. It's been shown in, the way the neural pathways work. When you take psychedelics like psilocybin or LSD, your brain shuts down. Basically, it's some of the processing power for your bullshit primal circuits and runs into opening up circuits to other places to communicate. And the brain is a complicated thing, so I won't get into that, and I don't know enough about it to pretend that I do. But DMT and psilocybin in the past, perhaps, and I'm not going to stoned ape theory, but perhaps helped us develop language and the ability to communicate, because it helped us to see that we were more than just individuals, that we were all one. That's the moment when humans started to understand community was more important than fighting and, territory. That, in other words, there was a point where humans decided survival wasn't enough. We wanted to build a society. And it seems like a simple transition, but why would that happen? Well, we wanted comfort at first, but at a point we had to give up a lot to live that way. And we built our intelligence, if you want to call it that, and awareness, and here we are today. Then we get into the more obscene parts of this. The Fibonacci sequence, phi, 1.618. This ratio is found throughout nature, and you've heard it a million times probably if you're into that kind of stuff, and I won't bore you with the details. If you haven't, I would urge you to even just pause this video and go research the Fibonacci sequence and understand the phi ratio. Because when you see this within sunflowers, you see it within snails. I'm not going to say, I'm not one of, you see it within galaxies and within the ratios of the human face, bodies. A lot of people dispute this and say, no, that's not true. It's actually slightly off. So is the sequence. It's slightly off. But the average comes out to this particular ratio, which is found throughout nature. And I won't go too much into it, but it's found in music too. In the scales of music and what sounds good in music, which notes sound good together, and certain sequences of notes, and you can look more into that too. It's really fascinating. But DMT, and I say just DMT because psilocybin, which is, is a form of DMT, which is found in psilocybin mushrooms, it's a long-acting form of DMT, which is much different than smoking it. But I don't want to get into the differences in consuming in methods, but DMT or psilocybin seem to remove that filter on our brains, which prevents us from seeing that the universe has order. And I would like to say that by seeing the universe has order, we realize that it shouldn't have order. And so anyhow, It looks like I'm running out of tape on here, which is unfortunate. I hope that this camera doesn't die on me while I'm right in the middle of doing this, but I wanted to say that there's a very similarity between DMT, ego death. These differences are something that, and real death, and the experiences that people show. Psychedelics seem to help us to see metaphors and symbols and patterns better than being straight. And maybe that's delusional a lot of the time. And I can't be sure. And that's one of the complicated things. I don't know. Lifting the veil is not necessarily knowledge. A lot of folks say that they've gained some great insight, and some have. But I'd like to say a lot of the time, it's really just a waste of time to pretend that we've gained some insight that we can share with others. What it's really about is feeling something within ourselves and discovering something different within ourselves. And each vision is unique, and the geography and culture where you live affect how those experiences will unfold and the visions you will see. But it's not about what you see, it's about the symbols and how you interpret them. Which brings me full circle back to dreams. Exactly my point. Dreams are very unique in the sense that they can teach us something about ourselves, but most importantly, they help us conquer our fear of death. And that's the main goal we should always have. I remember I read something earlier from Terence McKenna, and he said he was too amazed to participate when he was on a DMT experience. And that pretty much sums it up right there. Yes, you see amazing things, but as to what you can do with it, that remains to be determined. So there's a lot about psychedelics we don't know and a lot we do know, and those are the reasons we fear them. There's a lot we don't know and a lot we do know, and we fear the things we don't know about it, and we definitely fear the things we find when we're on them. And our experiences of dreams are very similar, and they help us to understand ourselves slightly better. So it's already a long video, so I'm going to leave it at that. Perhaps I'll make a second part since I'm running out of tape here. And I appreciate everybody listening, and I hope you learned something. I would like to say thank you so much to all my patrons. I only got a few, but thank you. Thank you to Valerie Martin, one of my new patrons, and to Refton Light.